Think you know everything about Pretty Woman? You have seen it 100 times. You know every line, every scene, every shopping bag tumbling out of a boutique door. But there is a version of this movie that almost killed somebody, ended on a dark street with nobody coming back, and nearly starred a completely different actress. Today we are pulling back the curtain on 15 facts about Pretty Woman that the studio probably wishes had stayed quiet. And trust me, by the time we get to number 1, you are going to look at that famous ending in a completely different way. So stay right here, because we are just getting started. Number 15 is about the very street that made this movie famous, Rodeo Drive. That scene where Vivian walks into those fancy boutiques and gets treated like garbage felt so real, because it basically was real. When the film crew first showed up on Rodeo Drive with their cameras and equipment, several of the actual high-end stores refused to let them film. These real boutiques did not want their names attached to a movie about a sex worker, no matter how charming she was. The doors closed. The phone calls went cold. So the production team did something smart. They found stores that would cooperate. And then they leaned hard into the exact attitude that was already floating around that street like expensive perfume. Every ounce of contempt those fictional clerks threw at Vivian was pulled straight from the real energy that lived on that block every single day. And here is where it gets beautiful. The movie became a massive culture-shifting hit, and those same stores that slammed the door on the production team suddenly had a very dramatic change of heart. Rodeo Drive quietly transformed itself into a Pretty Woman tourist attraction almost overnight. People started showing up just to stand where Vivian stood, just to walk that sidewalk, just to say the line. You know the line. Big mistake. Big. Huge. Money, as it turns out, has a remarkably effective way of making people forget they were ever rude in the first place. Number 14 is about the ending, because the ending you love almost never happened. In the original cut of this film, Edward hands Vivian her money, they say their goodbyes, and the movie just stops. No limo rolling up. No roses. No fire escape. No, she rescues him right back. He pays her and walks away, and the screen goes dark. That is it. When test audiences sat through that version, the feedback was absolutely brutal. People had just spent 2 hours watching these two characters slowly and carefully meld each other's walls down, and the movie essentially patted them on the shoulder and said, "Thanks for coming. The parking lot is to the left." The studio panicked. They called the cast back in. They built the fire escape set from scratch. They added the entire final sequence after the fact, as a completely separate shoot. Director Gere later admitted that by that point, they were no longer making a drama. They were making a fairy tale, and the original ending had belonged to a completely different and far sadder movie. Without that terrible test screening reaction, Pretty Woman would have quietly faded away with the other forgotten romantic dramas of 1990. Instead, that panic reshoot gave the world one of the most rewatched romantic endings of the entire decade. Number 13 will genuinely surprise you. Julia Roberts was not the first choice to play Vivian. Not even close. Before Julia's name came up seriously, the role went window shopping through some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Molly Ringwald passed. Michelle Pfeiffer passed. Meg Ryan passed. And Daryl Hannah did not just pass. She flat out called the script misogynistic and walked away entirely. The reason so many actresses said no is actually really important to understand. In the early drafts, Vivian was not the funny, warm, unstoppable force of nature we all fell in love with. She was written as a tragedy, a woman being slowly chewed up by a system that did not care about her at all. Dark, heavy, and honestly quite painful to sit with. That version needed a very different kind of performance. But as the script slowly changed, as the jokes came in and the tone softened and the fairy tale started to take over, the role needed someone completely different. It needed someone you would happily follow around a hotel lobby for 2 hours while she charmed and steamrolled every snooty person in her path. That is when Julia Roberts walked through the door. And from the moment she arrived, everything about the character shifted to match her specific energy. Funny, warm, surprising, completely impossible not to watch. Number 12 is about Richard Gere. And here is the thing most people forget. He had nearly walked away from acting entirely before Pretty Woman came along and changed everything. By the late 1980s, Gere's career had genuinely cooled off. The projects were not landing the way he wanted, and the roles coming his way were not exactly lighting a fire under him. When this particular script showed up, Rich Man, Hired Companion, one expensive week in Beverly Hills, he did not immediately see a career resurrection written all over it. What actually pulled him in was Edward's emotional coldness. Here was a man who had constructed such enormous walls around himself that he genuinely no longer knew how he felt about anything. And then this one completely unexpected person walks into his world and refuses to follow any of his carefully arranged rules, and slowly, without him even realizing it, she cracks him open. That gave Gere something real and specific to work with. Once he signed on and saw what Roberts was bringing to every single take, the whole film found its chemistry. Pretty Woman became one of his most beloved and enduring roles. Not bad for a job he almost turned down while quietly reconsidering his entire career. Number 11 is about the villain. Philip Stuckey, the sleazy lawyer played by Jason Alexander, was actually dialed back from something considerably more disturbing in the earlier drafts. His scenes had originally pushed the whole film into territory that felt genuinely menacing rather than dramatically tense. As the movie shifted toward romantic fairy tale, they needed a villain you could boo loudly without the story collapsing into something unwatchable. So the most extreme moments were trimmed but never fully discarded. What ended up on screen is still deeply uncomfortable on purpose. Alexander plays him perfectly, slick and charming in public, vicious the moment he thinks no one important is watching. He is exactly the kind of man Vivian has spent her entire life trying to avoid, and he is the perfect person for Edward to finally, satisfyingly punch right in the face. Number 10 is about the opera scene. It looks like a simple rich man shows off his world moment on the surface, but the opera was not chosen at random. The production team picked it deliberately because the story happening on that stage is practically a mirror of Vivian and Edward's entire situation. A woman from a completely different world suddenly swept into a life she was never supposed to have access to. Vivian sits there in that stunning red dress, watching a version of her own story play out in another language, and she reacts exactly the way a real person would react. No polite applause. Full emotional meltdown in an expensive box seat. And Edward? He is barely watching the stage at all. He is watching her. That quiet, understated detail tells you precisely where the film is emotionally at that exact moment. The opera is not just beautiful scenery. It is the movie winking directly at you and saying, yes, we know exactly what kind of fairy tale we are telling here. Number 9 is about the famous red dress, and here is the truth, it nearly did not happen. Early costume discussions had explored softer, cooler colors that would have blended Vivian gently into Edward's world, which sounds reasonable on paper, but completely misses the entire point. When she walks out in that deep, saturated red on opera night, the room has to stop and recalibrate. She is the same person who arrived in that hotel, but now the outside finally matches everything she has always been on the inside. And then there is the jewelry box moment. On the page, it was a standard romantic scene. Richard Gere decided it was too smooth and too rehearsed, so as Roberts leaned in to look at the necklace, he snapped the box shut right on her fingers. She yelped, and then completely exploded into that enormous, unfiltered laugh. No preparation, no character work, just Julia Roberts getting ambushed mid-take by her co-star. Gary Marshall watched the playback once and knew immediately they would never top it. He kept the prank and threw out the polished version. That single unscripted moment ended up in every trailer and clip reel for the next 30 years. Number 8 is about that laugh itself, because Julia Roberts' laugh in this movie is practically a supporting character. In the scene where Vivian is watching television and completely loses control, director Gary Marshall needed her to really commit. Not polite movie chuckling, but full body, can't breathe, tears streaming down your face cackling. So he got down off camera and tickled her feet. It worked immediately. What you are watching in that moment is not Vivian laughing at a TV show. It is Julia Roberts trying very hard not to accidentally kick her director square in the face. Number 7 is about Barney, the hotel manager. Hector Elizondo plays him with such quiet warmth that you might not realize he is doing something genuinely unusual for this type of character. That role is typically the polite obstacle, enforces the rules, treats anyone who does not look the part as a potential problem. Instead, Barney becomes the one person in that entire hotel who looks at Vivian twice and decides she deserves a real chance. In a film full of people judging her on sight, he is the rare soul who chooses to look again. Elizondo appeared in every single film Gary Marshall ever directed, all 18 of them, ever since Marshall first spotted him on a basketball court in 1979 and decided, apparently on the spot, that he was a terrific actor. Their partnership became one of the most consistent creative relationships in Hollywood history, and Pretty Woman is where it truly shines. Number 6 is about Roy Orbison. Oh, Pretty Woman was already a certified classic before this film existed. But the movie handed it something it never asked for, a second life as a liberation anthem. Orbison's original lyrics are written from the perspective of a man watching a woman walk past and hoping she turns around. Admiration from a distance. The movie takes that same song and completely flips its emotional meaning. Vivian strutting down Hollywood Boulevard turns a song about wanting into a song about becoming. An entire generation that had only ever half heard it suddenly knew every single note. Number 5. The famous movie poster contains almost none of the two actual stars. Julia's head is real. From the neck down, that is her body double Shelley Michelle. Richard Gere's hair in the film is naturally silver. On the poster, it is jet black. The two people selling you the movie are technically not the two people who appear in it. One is a head transplant. The other got an unauthorized dye job. It is the visual equivalent of a catfish profile, and it somehow worked on absolutely everybody. Number 4 is about Kit, Vivian's best friend played by Laura San Giacomo, who appears for maybe 15 minutes total, and yet practically everyone remembers her. She plays Kit like a real human being who has made some genuinely terrible choices, but still shows up for her friend when it matters. She is sharp, funny, and completely free of illusions about the life she and Vivian are living. Every time Kit appears on screen, she brings the movie back to earth, a quiet, uncomfortable reminder that fairy tales have expiration dates, and the world waiting on the other side of one is not gentle. Vivian got the happy ending. Kit got the scenes people still quote at parties 35 years later. Number 3 is about what this film actually did to Julia Roberts' career. Before Pretty Woman, she was the really good actress from a couple of movies. After it, she was the reason people bought the ticket. Vivian used everything Roberts does well at full volume with nowhere to hide. Hilarious, heartbreaking, furious at snooty saleswomen, and completely vulnerable in elevator conversations, sometimes within the same 2-minute stretch. The romantic comedy genre spent the entire decade of the 90s trying to bottle that same lightning in different outfits. Some came close. None quite got there. Number 2 is about the chemistry between Roberts and Gere, which was so unreasonably watchable that it directly created another movie. Runaway Bride had been floating around Hollywood for over a decade when producers approached Gere about it. His response was simple: "Get Julia and I am in." They got Julia. Audiences ran to theaters for the reunion. Runaway Bride actually outgrossed Pretty Woman at the domestic box office. And of course, Gary Marshall directed it. And of course, Hector Elizondo appeared in it. Because that is simply what Gary Marshall always did. And now, number 1, the fact that changes everything. Pretty Woman did not start as a romantic fairy tale. It started as something genuinely dark, and it had a completely different name. The original script was called 3000. That is the amount Edward pays Vivian for the week. And in that version, the title was not charming. It was a price tag. Writer J.F. Lawton's original screenplay was a harsh, unflinching drama about prostitution in Los Angeles. Vivian was a drug addict with a serious temper. Edward was cold, detached, and at times genuinely cruel. There was no romance, no shopping montage, no operatic meltdown in a red dress. In the original ending, Edward pulls the car down a side street. They have a brutal fight. He shoves her out of the car, throws the money down on top of her, and drives away. She watches the tail lights disappear. End of movie. Some drafts went even darker. Former Disney executive Jeffrey Katzenberg has said that in at least one version, Vivian dies of a drug overdose. Let that sit for a moment while you picture the jewelry box laugh and the big mistake huge scene. Then Disney's Touchstone Pictures got involved. Katzenberg pushed hard to transform the whole thing into a modern fairy tale. The script went through 6 complete rewrites. The drugs disappeared. The cruelty softened. The jokes arrived. And somewhere in the middle of all those revisions, a cautionary tale quietly became a love story. Julia Roberts later described the original screenplay as a really dark, depressing, horrible story about 2 horrible people. Her first reaction when she heard Disney had acquired it was to genuinely wonder if they were going to animate it. Gary Marshall came aboard, built the version we all know by heart, and the rest is the kind of movie history you rewatch on a rainy Sunday afternoon with no regrets whatsoever. 3000 might have been more honest about the world. Pretty Woman became the fairy tale. And fairy tales, as it turns out, are the ones that stay with you forever. That is 15 facts about Pretty Woman. The film that started as a dark drama nobody wanted to watch, survived 6 rewrites, and a catastrophic test screening, accidentally launched one of the biggest careers in Hollywood history, and turned a street full of real snobs into the most satisfying revenge fantasy of 1990. Which fact hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. Like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.